As men, especially as doctors, sometimes we hyper-focus on our career, neglecting other facets of our lives. But that is about to change. This is Dads Before Doctors. Some physicians claim their family is their top priority, but their lives tell a very different story. We'll help each other become family men who are doctors rather than doctors who have families. If it's health, wealth and legacy, emotional well-being, parenting, professional goals, or marriage, we're talking about it. Thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe. This is Dads Before Doctors, and this is your host, Adam Broussard, MD.
All right. Well, Dr. Saul, welcome to the Dads Before Doctors podcast, and I appreciate you being our first interview guest. If you want to just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, and we can get chatting.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be your first guest. I finished my medical school in Colorado, did a pediatric residency at Duke, moved to South Carolina to do a medical genetics fellowship, and then practiced medical genetics and pediatrics for 34 years. Over that time, got very engrossed in a variety of things. But that's what sort of the twists and turns of life and medical career sort of caught up with me there along the way. And I'll be glad to get into that with you. But currently, at the end of my career, I worked in our complex care practice, just doing care for kids with complex healthcare conditions. And then I retired clinically the end of 2020, but I'm still the president of the South Carolina chapter of the AAP until 2022. So I might retire, but I don't withdraw.
Wonderful. And you added Arthur to your title a few years back too. So yes. Busy pediatrician involved with, sounds like the National Society, practicing genetics. So what made you decide you wanted to become an author?
Well, back in the early 1990s, I'd been in practice for almost 15 years, and I felt like I wasn't contributing back to my community. I mean, I felt, I was doggone it, I was going to be the best darn doctor you could be. And my first marriage fell apart. I don't think because of that, for other reasons. And I found myself refocusing in the early 1990s. Went to a talk where I heard somebody say 12 words that had a profound impact on me. For anything that happens in the community, I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource. That really hit me. But it took me months to figure out how to internalize it into an action plan. So I subsequently went to some of the folks in our community and said, put me in, what can I do? Get me involved. So I got involved in a variety of community activities. And I guess maybe I almost felt smug that I was doing a good job. And then Columbine hit, 1999, April 20th. 2 teenage students go in and kill 13 people and then kill themselves. Kids killing kids. How does that happen? Does that make any sense? No. Could that happen in my community? Yes. What have I done to make a difference? Not enough. So I started writing a series of op-ed articles for the local paper about what I consider to be the 5 steps to community improvement. Somebody else could come up with their own 5 steps, but since I was doing it, it was my 5 steps. Learn to be the best parent you could be, get involved, stay involved, which I think is different than getting involved, love for others, and I think the toughest, forgiveness. And then over the next 12, 13 years, wrote a series of over 160 op-ed articles for the local newspaper on those topics. Sort of then crystallized, and I started sending them to my friends around the country, and they said, you need to put this into a book. So I did. And then I published that now 8 years ago, titled My Children's Children, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine. But it's interesting, as I was doing this, I oftentimes would submit the op-ed article to my wife to read before I'd send it into the paper. And she was saying, "Oh, I don't know about this. That sounds a little preachy." And I said, "You don't understand who I'm preaching to." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm preaching to myself. This is what I think I should be doing. And if it has of any benefit to somebody else, great. But at least it puts on paper what I think I should be doing moving
Absolutely.
forward."
You can only change the world by changing yourself, I believe. And until you put it down, it's really hard to move forward, I think. So what have you learned personally along the way? Those 5 steps, sound like they're great guidelines to go with. But how has that changed you?
Well, I think it really has dramatically changed me. I've learned, when I say learn to be the best parent you can be, I know that is, I carefully chose those words because everyone has their own capabilities, I think, in terms of parenting. So it's a continual learning process, lifelong learning, to be the best parent he or she can be. Um, some parents need more guidance. And I certainly know that in my career of 40 plus years as a pediatrician. And some parents, even with the guidance, will not do as well as I think they can be doing. But I've learned to temper my responses and to recognize that not everyone is as good a parent as Bob Saul. Now, I say that tongue in cheek because I'm as fallible as anybody. So I've learned the spectrum of parenting, and I'll get to that when we talk about my most recent book. I've learned that you really need to get involved, but that will change, and staying involved will be can move you from project to project, but you need to keep up the momentum in some way, shape, or form. Love for others. It sounds so easy. It sounds so biblical. It sounds like what we should always be doing, but it's so hard in terms of learning how to realize your own humanity and your failings and how to judge people from that viewpoint instead of I'm better than they are. But I think the toughest lesson I've learned, and this is really in terms of my lifelong journey, this is the toughest one, is forgiveness. Forgiveness is an evolutionary process in my mind. I mean, when your 2-year-old or when your 3-year-old pushes your 2-year-old and the 2-year-old starts crying, you look down at him and yell at him and say, "Tell him you're sorry." I mean, I guess that's step one of a long step, of a long process. But what you learn in terms of forgiveness in your first decade is very different than your second decade, hopefully very different than your third decade when you become a young adult. But it will continue to change. And I've continued to try to understand and nurture that process. If you haven't read, you need to read the book Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. And one of the major points in there, he says, is you need to forgive yourself first for what you're thinking, what you're doing and not doing well. Forgive others and do it now. And part of that is for do it now is because he relates in the book how he and one of his friends had got into a little tiff and they wouldn't talk. And then his friend died. And he felt so bad, grief-stricken for the friend, but also that the relationship was so fragmented and unnecessarily fragmented because he was unwilling to take the steps to start working on forgiveness.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And just especially learning to, forgive yourself and things that we as parents, as physicians, like beat ourselves up over, that we look at this negative, consequence of our actions or a decision that we made and not, the 101 positive things that we've done with our kids or our patients.
Well, but I think the other important thing I've learned, and I think the lessons are out there, it's just we don't listen to them very well, is communal forgiveness. As a social body, we need to exercise forgiveness. A couple examples there. The American Medical Association back almost 2 decades ago was recognized that it was a profoundly racist organization. That it had specifically precluded African Americans from joining. And that's where the National Medical Association sprouted from. They issued a mea culpa in the journal saying that the people that are there now didn't do this, but we did it. So it's you can't just say it wasn't me. You have to recognize it was us and move forward. I use the same example really in our state with the Confederate flag. There's still this, to my mind, this stigma of the Confederate flag that is still held out there with some reverence when it, for many people in our society, it's a very abhorrent symbol. So the whole issue of forgiveness has been a real journey for me. It has in many ways has profoundly changed me and understood even my relationships with my patients. I mean, I have many patients that at times would be very upset with me about this or that. And I realized I was able to take that step back and look at the situation. You're a pediatric anesthesiologist, I'm a pediatrician. We have to realize that sometimes we're dealing with families in their most vulnerable times, when they're in their most emotional states. And what they say and do might not be a very significant reflection of what they would actually feel when things are calm. So I have to learn to forgive them, and actually most of the time just let it roll off my shoulders.
Yeah, you absolutely. You get to control how you respond to that, and you have no idea what's going on in their lives. And I think that is definitely something to realize in medicine and in just everyday life, just trying to kind of put yourself in their shoes too.
One other quick example, and this, I don't say this to be boastful, but I think it's a fun example. One night, I can't remember, I think my son was about 7 or 8. He did something that really upset me. And I flew off the handle. And I yelled, and he just wilted and was into a puddle. And my wife was very upset at me that I yelled. And so we went into that family lockdown mode that probably not your family, but my family has done at times, where nobody talks for a couple hours. And then it was finally time to go to bed. It was finally time for me to lay down with my son. And I laid down, and after we went through the deep breathing and could realize we still could talk, I said, "Son, I'm so sorry about what I did. You did something that really bothered me, but my reaction was completely inappropriate. And I really want to apologize that we're on this together. We're working on this together. And I really want to apologize for what I did." And he said, "Dad, would you be quiet?" I said, "Why?" He said, "I hate it when you're nice." So that was humbling to me. And to remind myself that I indeed can take a step back and do what needs to be done. I had to forgive myself first.
Exactly. We're certainly all imperfect, as much as we try not to be and think we aren't sometimes. Realizing, just being able to realize that you made a mistake and that you need to forgive yourself and ask forgiveness of even our kids. Like they know a lot more than you think they do sometimes. And you certainly don't like to be yelled at by your boss or spouse or anything else. Like that 2 and 3-year-old doesn't either, probably. So what was next? So you did a children's book after that one?
Yeah, I did a children's book after that one. I'd always wanted to do a children's book sort of on the theme of my children's children. But it's a very atypical children's book. I call it Goodnight Moon with a Message. It's a series of 13 illustrations that were beautifully illustrated by one of my fellow alumni from Colorado College, where I went to where I graduated from undergraduate. And these 13 illustrations sort of depict what you can do in your community to make a difference. There's a picture of a family visiting a military cemetery. There's a picture of a family visiting an animal shelter. There's a picture of a father reading to his children with the TV off. There's a picture of baseball teams coming together and shaking at the end of the game, shaking hands at the end of the game. And so the book has text for children that could read. The book has text for parents, sort of a brief take-home message. And the book has, can you find things for each of the pictures? So even for newborn, even for infants, and I have a now 5-month-old granddaughter, so I hope my son and daughter-in-law are using this book, where they can sit down and look and say, where's the pink ball? Where is the teddy bear? Where's this? And so I'd like to think it's a book that could be used in various stages along the way, in different ways, at all sorts of levels.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I know, some books that we've had with our older son, being able to grow with him along the way has been great. And it's crazy the things that he picks up on just, just reading it and going through from that earlier stages to reading some of the bigger messages. It's great.
Absolutely. And then I got involved with based on my work with the 5 steps and reading what the American Academy of Pediatrics was doing in terms of early brain and child development, in terms of what's happening in early childhood is affecting not just in the rest of childhood, but we now know that it affects adulthood, that the more adverse childhood experiences you have as a child will put you at increased risk for cardiovascular disease, hypertension, obesity, and drug use, and a variety of things. So I approached one of my colleagues and said, we need to put a book together, sort of meld those two. We approached the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they published that 3 years ago now, Thinking Developmentally, making positive childhood experiences to promote lifelong health. So the first half of the book sort of looks at the science of early brain and child development. Andy Garner is the primary author. He's a MD, PhD up in Cleveland. And then the second half of the book says, okay, well, science is interesting and we all love our science, but what's the practicality of it? How does it translate to parents? How does it translate to doctors? How does it translate to policymakers? How does it translate to all the various people in society that can make a difference? So that book has been well received, and we were excited about that book.
So what are some key takeaways for our listeners, both in their physician, whether they're pediatric physicians or just deal with pediatric patients, and then what they can use in their life at home?
I think the couple big takeaways from that is one, what we're now knowing is that what happens in childhood isn't just in childhood. And so what happens in childhood needs to be translated better to our healthcare providers in the second, third, and fourth decade of life. I mean, we don't do very well. I mean, I was just reading a couple articles in pediatrics about early, maybe even prenatal exposures or early neonatal exposures, and the impact they have on healthcare in early adulthood. Some of that was based on evidence in terms of epigenetic changes in methylation in the genome, since we know that makes a difference. So what happens early needs to be assessed later on, and our patients need to sort of know that. And to my mind, it sort of needs to be part of their health passport. We sort of make this mythical, horrible transition for most of our patients when they transfer out of pediatrics to adulthood. We sort of, bye-bye, good luck. And so many of the things that happened early on, we don't pass on to them that could have a profound effect on their health. We just sort of hope and pray and hope that things are good. The second big takeaway to me is the assessment and the importance of safe, stable, nurturing relationships. what we call SSNRs, which are so much more important than SSNIs, excuse me, SSRIs, selective serotonin release inhibitors. And I'm not belittling the importance of those drugs, but a more primary way of dealing with emotional, social and emotional mental health is understanding the SSNRs, the safe, stable, nurturing relationships in a child's life, and where they are and what can be done to enhance those. I mean, so many vulnerable children in our society that even families that have two parents, parents can still mess up. And then you start to have talk about single parent families, and it's more difficult. And then there might be the caregivers for a child, might be the grandparents, or might be the aunts or uncles, or foster parents, children that are in the foster care system. So we need to be understanding the safe, stable, nurturing relationships, and seeing how we can enhance those, or when necessary, come to the aid of those children and those families, because that also makes a big difference in the family. I don't know if there's another book called The Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance.
Very interesting.
And if you look back at that, and I might be missing the story a little bit, but the take-home message I got from that book is, despite the fact that his father was really not in the relationship, his mother was in and out because of her drug use, that his somewhat crusty, though tenacious grandmother provided the SSNR that he needed to get him through a very tumultuous childhood, to get him into the military, to help then to get to pursue a college career at Ohio State, and then law school in Yale. And now I understand he's even running for Senate in Ohio. SSNRs are incredibly important, and we should never take them for granted. So I think pediatricians, and this is one of my high horses here, I think pediatricians really need to be understanding what's going on in the network of a child and their family. It's easy for us to get caught up in the child care checkboxing that we do. Did we ask these questions? Did we do this? Did we do all that? But it's sometimes hard because our time isn't necessarily appropriated for that, but it's probably some of the more important stuff that we do in terms of connecting with the families and understanding that. And that, to me, is what builds the trust. Because one of the major things that pediatricians and pediatric care providers do is establish a trust that the family has with them. Without that, we're sort of just flailing, I think.
So, I mean, in general, most physician households are relatively privileged compared to the rest of society. How would you encourage, other physicians listening to this to help build, SSNRs in society and their community as a whole, outside the clinic?
Being a role model, because the other take-home message from my first book, My Children's Children, the subtitle was Raising Good Citizens in the Age of Columbine. I think that the primary target of parenting is raising your children to be good citizens. An example, my parents divorced when I was young. I remember my mother, who was this incredible individual, but always just saying, Bob, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be happy. Well, if I had took that to a certain level, I could just have been a hedonistic teenager and young adult and done whatever I wanted to do. Fortunately, my mother was a significant role model that didn't happen. My oldest son was 8 when his mother and I divorced. And I remember as he got into his teen years, myself saying, I just want you to be happy. Well, then as I started writing these op-ed articles and putting this book together, what I profoundly realized is that I really wanted him to be a good citizen. I wanted him to have empathy. I wanted him to care for other people. I wanted him to love other people. I wanted to be able to listen to other people. And to my mind, happiness is a secondary effect. of those character traits. And maybe that's a simplistic view of things, but that's my view of things. So be the good citizen, and being the good citizen is at so many different levels. It means getting involved, staying involved, loving others, exercising forgiveness, and for others. And the children, I think, will learn from those role models.
Yeah, I think how you show up really ends up manifesting itself in, positivity all around if you show up positively.
Yeah.
What do you think has changed, as parenting overall between when you were raising your boys and now that you now have grandchildren? How has parenting evolved, and how do you see it, I guess, continuing to evolve?
Well, I get that question a lot, and obviously, my bias is it's still the same core values. Obviously, the tools have changed, and some of the specific tools in terms of electronics and that sort of thing. But the connection with the child, the person-to-person connection, the ability to understand, the ability to listen, to be a part of their lives, is still the same as it was back when I was growing up. So I don't think it's changed a lot. Now, if I read some of the columns out there from some of the psychologists who tout themselves as being child behavioral experts, we've got it all screwed up. Everyone is just, we're too understanding, we're too loving, we're not disciplinarian enough, and we're not punishing enough. And I just think that's a bunch of hooey if you do it right. And the example for me is the word discipline. So many people in our society use discipline to mean punishment. I think that's a bass-backwards way of thinking of it. The root word for discipline is disciple, which means to teach. And so whatever we do when behavior is not correct, at least in our eyes, we should be thinking of this as a teaching experience, a learning experience. And of course, physical punishment for me is a no-no. Corporal punishment teaches the wrong message. But I think there's no problem in listening, learning, and understanding what your child's doing to try to help mold their behavior going forward. And the reason for learning and doing all those things is you have to be conscious yourself of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, because that's sort of then my last book was Conscious Parenting, which using the conscious parenting, using the parental awareness threshold, because I think we have to be conscious in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing that.
Yeah, I think they're teaching us as much as we're teaching them along the way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Children are our teachers if we let them be, much like our patients are our teachers. I just 5 months into my retirement, I just got this beautiful handwritten note from one of my patients telling me how much she missed me and how much I had made a difference in her life and how I had actually helped her to be a better mom. I started getting teary when I read that. And I'd like to think that how much I've learned from the people over my career. I've looked back through some of my patient interactions in the past, and I cringe with what I did in the past. But what I hopefully have learned from consciously assessing those is I've improved going forward.
So what tips do you have being more conscious as a parent as overall?
Well, let me back up to how I sort of came up with the paradigm, because in some ways it's not mine. The last 8 years of my career, I worked as the medical director of general pediatrics at the what's now Prisma Children's Hospital upstate in Greenville, South Carolina. And one of the things that we came on board was taking a leadership course, and it was called Conscious Leadership. and I'll characterize it briefly, is that whenever you're in, you want to be open, receptive, and ready to learn. When you're that, you're above the line. When you're closed, you're defensive, and damn it, I'm right, you're below the line. Well, let's recognize that as humans, we're going to be above and below the line all the time. And there's, you might have that anesthesiology staff meeting that about a half hour in, you're going, God, when's this going to be over? If you're conscious, you're saying, okay, I'm below the line. I mean, do I want to consciously improve and be above the line? And how can I better engage? Or do I want to just stay here and just hope this meeting will be over? So so long as you're conscious of where you are, hopefully you can recognize that, okay, I'm really down here and I need to move up here. The same thing for me happens with parenting. We need to recognize that when, say that example I said earlier, when my son upset me, I needed to, okay, I'm really below the line. I'm just defensive, I'm right. And I might be right, but there was a better way to doing it than what I did. So conscious parenting is understanding where you are. Instead of a line, I call it the parental awareness threshold, or the PAT. And so you can try to hopefully be above the line most of the time, but recognize you will be below the line at times. And there are examples that are plentiful throughout the lifespan of a child. Colicky baby, you might just have worked a 24-hour shift, and everyone's tired in the family, and the baby's screaming, and it's tough to be, that's just a baby. I understand that. You might be, I don't think I can take this anymore. So if you're below the line and understand that, that can help you seek help and guidance to where you need to go. That 1-year-old that's sitting in the high chair throwing the peas as mom's making supper. Oh, isn't that, dad comes home, isn't that cute? No, it's not so cute for mom. She's at wit's end. And I don't mean to be sexist. The roles could be reversed. Whoever it is could be at wit's end, and those peas are just the straw that breaks the camel's back. So we need to understand where we are and try to understand the behavior and consciously alter our responses accordingly. I think part of that is we need to be conscious of where we are in the moment. But I think conscious parenting is also retrospective, because you might say, oh, I really, what I did 2 days ago, that wasn't very good. And I'm not sure I ever really corrected it, but I need to correct it going forward and try to do better.
So I'm here and just kind of being able to take a step back and look at your thoughts and actions objectively, so that you can realize, what happened kind of unintentionally in the moment, and versus what, is more useful, and how you can change what you need to do to change that to that more intentional, conscious behavior and thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that's going to require some work on the part of the parents in terms of understanding the stages of child development. What do I understand where the child is now? I mean, the 3-year-old that has a temper tantrum, it's not about you. It's about the 3-year-old.
Because they're hungry or tired.
It's usually more the latter. And they didn't get what they want. And I can tell, and I've had this conversation countless times in my career, telling families that you just need to calmly just sit there, and if it's safe, you can walk away, and you are the child's audience. And if you take away the audience, the child will change their behavior. If you feed into that audience, then it will perpetuate the problem. Now, that's never easy in the moment, because it's not snap, but if that's a process that you employ over time, it makes sense.
This morning, my mom was watching a 3-year-old, and he wouldn't get out of bed, wouldn't go to the bathroom, whatever. And she was saying that she she's like, okay, well, it's time to go feed the dogs. I'm gonna go downstairs and feed the dogs. And all of a sudden he was at the top of the stairs. It's like, I'm done crying now. Yeah, Mom.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you just ignore him, he'll calm down a lot faster.
You hopefully you just learned a significant lesson from your mother.
Well, I'm trying to teach her that.
Well, another example I use in the book: parent picks up a child from school, runs by the drive-through at one of the fast food chains to get a drink on the drive home. But then the parent says, "Be very careful with this drink. I don't want you to spill it." Well, the child's in the back seat, in the booster seat, about a couple of miles down the road. "Mom, I spilled my drink." Well, at this point, you're just, I can't believe you did this, and pull over and ready to clean up the mess and start getting very aggravated with the child. You found out that it actually was that curve you took too fast where you, in the book bag, knocked over the drink. So I emphasize that whatever you do, you have to pause, assess, and then choose. Pause to say, okay, let me just stop for a second, assess sort of the situation, and then choose maybe, hopefully, a more appropriate response. But that takes time. And again, there will be enough screw-ups along the way that we need to try to do better all along.
Yeah, it's a progression. You definitely have to, something you have to work with, and it's never gonna come easy. In my experience, it's gonna always take some work, but hopefully along the way you get better at it.
Well, I mean, and you're talking about examples, and obviously being a good citizen, and obviously that is being a good spouse too, because children learn and see what the spousal interactions are. Those aren't always optimal. There can be disagreements along the way, but hopefully those disagreements can, if they're significant, can be out of view of the child. If they're within view of the child, then there needs to be some explanation and hopefully some apology going
Yeah, and that's
forward.
certainly a goal of the podcast, and our group as a whole is trying to live out that example in all areas of life, whether it's showing your kids that you're exercising and eating well, and you're having a healthy relationship, because certainly we know that if they see unhealthy relationships in the past, they're more likely to mimic that in the future. And how you treat them to, as you said, become good citizens. You have to be a good citizen. You can't just, well, Dad, you didn't do that. Like, coming along, you have to set the same example, because it's crazy how much they soak up, and 2 weeks later they're gonna pull it back out at you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been watching the TV and make some offhanded comment about somebody, either one of my sons or my spouse said, that sort of is opposite of what you always are writing about. So you're right. I agree. Point well taken.
So any specific things any advice for physician fathers that you have?
Well, I mean, I think, obviously, I mean, when I came out of training 40 plus years ago, working 60 hours a week was a piece of cake. And now some of the places are able to do less, but even so, I specifically made sure that I had time and energy for my son. And I have what I call two only children. They're 12 years apart. And so, but each of them had different needs along the way. And I specifically tried to do what I could. In retrospect, I always felt, oh, I just didn't do that right, or I wish I'd done this. But those introspective things that we do ourselves are so important to hopefully change our behavior going forward. Look for those special occasions when it can just be dad and child. and look for those times when you can really do something very meaningful without your phone, without your pager, and they don't have to think about that you're going to be checking something else, which is really hard these days. Even, I mean, when I came out of training, all we had was a pager. We didn't have a phone that we could carry with us. Well, now you got the phone and this portable computer, which makes it that everyone wants to do it. So I think we really have to decompress from our gadgets with
Absolutely.
our kids.
I know my 3-year-old will come and take my phone out of my hand sometimes and be like, look at my block size filter, whatever. And, sometimes it's only so interesting to watch the same tower get built and destroyed, for 30 minutes. But I think those tiny things are really what's the kids really bond to it, as much as, some extravagant gesture trip, it's, dad being at the baseball game to see them hit their home run, or when they look up to the stands that you're there and not staring at your phone even.
Yeah.
So where can guys find you, find out more information, find your book?
Well, my website is www.mychildren'schildren.com. And the 4 books are listed there. I have a blog on that that I try to post something every 2 to 3 weeks. I just posted a blog last week on the tale of two opposites in terms of even when we know things, we do things wrong. And I talked about the opposite of love and not hate, but interesting, love and selfishness that Reverend Bishop Curry, Reverend Bishop Curry talked about in his book, racism versus anti-racism, and wealth versus not poverty, but justice. So I'm trying to, and on my journey here, I'm trying to look at ways that I can continue to talk about parenting, but also citizenship and all of those issues going forward. My current project is working on a book entitled "What Really Matters," and I'm a couple chapters into it. Hopefully I'll continue to have the energy to keep going forward.
How can the guys support you in your mission?
How can the guys support me in my mission? Well, if they want to reach out to me, and my email is robertsaul@me.com. I'd love to. I have an email list where I send things out, and I'd love to communicate with them and hear feedback from that.
I've really enjoyed chatting with you, and hopefully we can all start being more conscious parents, both with our own kids, help build good citizens in our practice and our lives. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Oh, thank you so much. Been my pleasure.
You too.
Take care.
You've been listening to the Dads Before Doctors podcast. Family men who are doctors rather than doctors who have families. In an evolving and ever fast-paced world, we cannot lose sight of our real priorities. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had fun. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And tell a friend about the show. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at dadsbeforedoctors.com. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email adam@dadsbeforedoctors.com. And find us on Facebook and Instagram at Dads Before Doctors. Remember, the host of this show is not your doctor, your coach, or your financial advisor. This show is strictly for entertainment. Till next time, this is Dads Before Doctors, signing off.